Hello and welcome back to Building Wealth on the Go, podcast by KLT Wealth Management. Today is April 15th, 2025. I'm your host, Brad Wilson, joined by my colleagues, Courtney Beach and Joe Filiameni. Thank you for tuning back into our podcast. If you are new here or you haven't already, make sure to follow along or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. We're excited today to dive into the topic of buying homes, home ownership, living situations, renting versus owning. Lots to really dive into. It's a very hot button issue as we've kind of seen the market, specifically here in Canada and Ontario, really evolve over the last 5 years through the pandemic. And so lots to discuss with that. So without further ado, let's jump right into one of the biggest kind of hidden items when people are thinking about buying a home is those extra and hidden costs. So let's first dive into a couple there. Courtney, do you have a couple of extra costs and considerations for our listeners that may be going through the process of looking to purchase a home?
Sure. I think the first one I would bring up is bills. Especially if you're like upsizing, it's not just the house is going to cost more, it's all the bills to maintain the house, maintenance, utility bills. So before you jump in, make sure you build those into a projected budget to see if you can really afford it. The second one is if you're getting into HOA or condo fees. More communities are building in HOAs to cover the communal costs because cities don't want to pay for it anymore, so they get the homeowners to do it. So find out what those HOA fees, build them into that budget again, and see if you can cover those costs in your cash flow.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that's a really important one to consider. But also, if you're a first-time home buyer, there's also credits that you're going to get that maybe not a lot of people are aware of either. When you're filing your taxes, there's the first home buyer's tax credit there that you can get towards your income taxes in the first year. You do avoid one of the big fees as well is land transfer tax. Mm-hmm. So there are lots of things to consider. So I think the biggest one is it really costs you a lot more money to upgrade to that second house than initially getting into the market there.
That's true.
Yeah, that land transfer tax is applicable here in Ontario, and it's pretty considerable when you look at the numbers, and especially with house valuations now, the way they're kind of sitting, roughly an $800,000 house in sort of southwestern Ontario, but not in the Toronto area, would run you roughly $12,500 in land transfer tax. Mm-hmm. So, okay, first-time home buyer, you'll get maybe $4,000 credit on that, so that helps soften the blow. But it's another $12,500 on top of the price that you're paying. So, big consideration when you are looking at buying a house is the additional cost that you're going to have to absorb. Either add it to the financing, or it has to come up essentially and paid up front. But I think backing a little bit away, keep in mind location when buying a property, I think is still a big thing, especially if you're looking for the resale opportunities for that, which the unfortunate thing is, like, sometimes people are buying a house as a temporary measure because they're so excited to get into the house, and then are looking in 3 years to kind of move to another house. So again, it depends on what your goals are. But one big thing that I was told by my brother when I bought my first house, don't get emotional over the purchase of your first house or any house at all. Keep the emotions out of it. Stay very focused. It is a business transaction, because I think so many people have run afoul when they allow their emotions to kind of take over and they pay a little bit higher for the pricing. And so you need to kind of have that as a consideration.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Joe, because people, they go through that walkthrough of the house, and then, I fall in love with this piece of it, fall in love with that piece of it, and then the sort of budgeting, the numbers, everything they had planned going into it goes out the window as they run into that negotiation piece, and the seller's really trying to squeeze every last dollar out of the potential buyers. And we're no longer in a market where you're in a bidding war and everyone's throwing $100,000 over asking price. You're really in a negotiation now when you're making a home purchase. So I think that's becoming more and more important now than ever. I think it is important too to think of lawyer and real estate fees. Those are two fees as well that really add up. And if you're in the process of selling a home and purchasing another, that sort of next step, moving maybe from an entry level first home buyer property to a single family dwelling, that's a big cost you have to look into as well. 5% potentially on a real estate agent, and another $2,000 to $3,000 in lawyer fees per transaction can run you another $30,000 real easily, if not more. So those are things to really factor in when, Joe, you mentioned if it's 3 years you want to move to that next property. Well, you've got to factor in there's going to be $30,000 to $40,000 of selling costs right away, just baked into that transaction. And so that's where, maybe these real estate flips are not as valuable as they once were in a skyrocketing market. And you really have to look at it in the long game now when you're getting into it, that you see yourself living in that property for a long time.
Yeah, and on the same lines, if you are considering living in your starter home for a little while and then upgrading, a lot of people are doing renos, and those renos are starting to cost more and more with inflation. So you want to build in a nice cushion for extra costs you were not expecting when you are calculating those reno costs.
Yeah. No, I think that the more we talk about costs, really leads us into the whole debate now of, is it better for me to buy the house or do I just rent and not worry about all this hassle?
Yeah.
So Joe, what are your thoughts on the whole rent versus ownership debate and debacle here that we live in 2025?
Well, as many people that know me, I'm very, very vocal when it comes to the debate between rent and own. I still strongly believe it depends on where you are in your life, in your career. So I do maintain that the younger couple starting off, a young family, they need to have a house. I truly believe that you need to have a house. You need to, put down roots. It's good stability. You're close to the schools for your kids, where you're raising your kids. Very, very important. So I maintain sort of at that earlier age that you need to actually buy a house, get into the housing market. Later on in life, and I've talked to so many of my friends about this, I don't think you need to have a house as much, because it all depends on what your retirement or pre-retirement might look like. The kids are gone. Do I need a really big house anymore? Do I want to travel? And how do you travel when you have a large house that you have to maintain, as well as gardens and snow removal and all that great stuff? Of course, you can get into these condo developments, which is certainly very, very big and popular, that you can get into a condo development where a lot of that is taken care of. But it depends on your goals ultimately in retirement, and even in pre-retirement. Do I really need to have ownership of a house? So that's the way I stand with it. I think that there is an opportunity, especially as you get older and closer to that retirement age, where you can sell the house, unlock the value there, have that money, and then just rent. Now, rents are not cheap either, so that's something to consider.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely about stability versus freedom. There are people who are so driven their whole lives to have that house. They'll have the stability, but then they get retirement and they don't have the cash flow to enjoy their lives as they would wish to do. So it really becomes about what your priority is. Do you want the stability of having a house, or do you want the freedom to live the life you wanted? And
That gets into the whole mortgage aspect too, right? Like so many more people are heading into retirement with a mortgage, and they are struggling on a fixed income to pay that mortgage down just for the purpose of being debt free completely. And I ask, what do you care if you're debt free or not debt free? It's a mental block, right?
Mhm.
And people
It's a generational thing, Joe.
it's a generational thing for the older generation
Yeah.
that they have to be debt free. They have to have home ownership. But sometimes the cards don't work out that way. So
Mhm.
you should not worry about the mortgage.
Mhm.
And long as you can make the payments, but then you can enjoy life too, right? Because then it maintains your cash flow and you're not struggling. To Courtney's point, there's been so many clients that we've talked to in the past who, yeah, they've done great. They have a beautiful house. It's completely paid off, but they have no investments. They have no cash. So how are they going to retire if they have no cash? They would have to sell the house or access the equity in that house. So major considerations, the way I look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think on those two kind of scenarios that you talked about, Joe and Courtney, like with the younger generation, it's harder now with the home prices to get in. People aren't making enough money out of the gates. The average person to be able to afford even a townhouse. And so to start a family and have that. So I think you're seeing that ability to afford a house be pushed back later unless they're getting help. And I think that we're still in the very early stages of that generational wealth transfer where you have people who purchased their homes in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when they were 20, 30 years old, who are still alive living in those homes that are now worth 1.2, 1.5 million dollars,
Mhm.
that in these really, really desirable areas that once they pass away or they move out of those homes, that wealth is going to flow through to the generations that are lacking those funds to be able to enter the housing market. So I still would think we're at the very, very early phase of that sort of transfer of that generation. I think it's even the generation before the baby boomers or the first iteration of the baby boomers that we're talking about there. But it's like you said, Joe, they're sitting on a ton of equity in a home, but they don't have the cash either. So it's again, where does the ball drop on that sort of shift in the market? And I think we're going to see a giant shift on that when that sort of starts to happen, and we see that snowball effect of the wealth being passed around. I think you're going to see a lot of people be able to enter the market that weren't before, because at the end of the day, those homes are just going to end up rolling into the estate and will be passed on to the beneficiaries at that point if they're not selling the homes and using some of the money. So I think that's one of the biggest considerations, and there really is a generation now of the rental millionaires, the people who are putting their money to work. They don't have to worry about maintenance. They don't have to worry about property tax. And it's not going to work for everyone, but they are able to invest the difference, put money aside, build wealth in the markets. And
Travel, enjoy life,
yeah,
right?
they're not tied down. And some of those people have kids, some of those are single individuals, some of those are couples without kids. But you're seeing a generation emerge, and part of it is they've priced themselves out. They're being priced out of the market, so they're saying, hey, I'm going to live it my own way and do it something different because I can't keep up with what has been the historical social and cultural norms of
Mhm.
purchasing a house in my 20s and laying down roots and having a family. So it really is, times have changed, the market landscape's changed, and ultimately I think it boils down to your preference. I think you really have to look at your situation financially, socially, what your career aspects look like. There's a lot more flexibility now with careers. You can work remotely. People don't need to, put a house down right beside their employer, so that they have short commutes to work and they're not spending time in traffic and whatnot. So times have really changed on that aspect. So there really is a lot more that goes into it, and it really, really boils down to personal preference.
Yeah. I got two last tips here for everybody when you're
Mhm.
looking at a house. I use a little tool, very, very simple. Take a look at the square footage of the house. Then take the value divided by the square footage. It will give you a cost per square foot. I generally don't include the basement when I'm calculating square footage. As long as you're doing comparable that way, it will show you the value or the cost per square foot and helps you to compare one area from another, because certain areas have higher cost per square foot. So the little tool that I've always used anytime I've done any analysis, as well as one area that we kind of touched on is the mortgage aspect, which nowadays we have larger mortgages. We will have larger mortgages because the value is higher. The consideration of life insurance. Do I buy the life insurance at the bank when I'm getting the mortgage, or do I get standalone? Have, special consideration. Talk to your financial planner with reference. There are good and bad aspects to both, but typically it leans towards having standalone life insurance. This because you're not always going to be at the same bank for that mortgage for the lifetime of that mortgage. So have those as considerations.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I think, we hammered through a lot of information. Take this, sit down, think about it, and really take a look at what your situation is before you make that decision. And really, it is that personal preference. But we hope you found a little bit of this podcast informative today. Hopefully, you took something away. Really do appreciate everyone listening in. Like I mentioned at the beginning, make sure to follow, subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to, and we'll be back next month with another edition of the podcast.